Hello and welcome to a very important discussion on the UK fashion industry with SHOWstudio. I'm SHOWstudio's editor, Hetty Mahlich, and I'm so happy to be joined by a really brilliant panel today of a real range of people who work in the fashion industry. Today I really want to we're going to be talking about pretty broad things, which we were saying before, we could kind of do a panel on each of the topics we're going to talk about, but I think today I want to try and get into that kind of gap between the dream of fashion and the actual reality of what's happening working within our industry. I'd love to start by if everyone could introduce themselves briefly and what they do, and then we'll get into it. Karen, should we start with you?
Yeah, Karen Binns, stylist, creative director, and fashion consultant.
My name is Bisoye Babalola. I'm a creative entrepreneur and the founder of Holiday Club.
I'm Tamara Cincik. I'm the CEO of Fashion Roundtable, and I'm the Professor of Fashion and Sustainability at Bath University.
I'm John Mooney, the ex-Chief Creative Officer of Matches Fashion.
I'm Michael Miller. I'm a celebrity stylist, and I am the branch chair of Bet2's Fashion UK.
I want to start with the collapse of Matches. John, I'm not going to make you talk about Matches for an hour, but I think it's a good place to start because the shuttering of Matches is really, I think, revealed a lot of realities of how vulnerable working in the fashion industry is, and kind of this broken system which we want to talk about today. John, but we were speaking off camera before, and you said something interesting about the kind of industry being pretty ruled by numbers now. Maybe you could talk a bit about that and what you think the collapse of Matches has kind of revealed about the industry.
I mean, I think that the reality is that fashion is an industry, and so therefore you are in a situation where businesses need to make money, continue to be profitable, to actually retain staff, to create kind of growth, and everyone wants to make kind of growth. No business is satisfied with 0% increase in kind of sales on the year. I think the difficulty you've kind of got, and it's not just kind of with the Matches situation and what's happened there. I think it's just more, as a business in the creative industry, at what point do you almost like get to the edge of kind of a scenario whereby creativity is in the demise because profitability, it's all about profitability. And I think that it's trying to strike the balance. It's almost, every brand, whether you're high street or luxury, or whether you're a multi-brand luxury retailer, you'll be in a situation whereby you're always going to have percentage mixes of kind of the products you have in your range. And you're going to have your commercial commodity products right the way through to, your runway hot products and wherever else. It's that kind of mix, that you can't have one without the other. But the reality is, you get the mixes wrong, incorrect. All of a sudden you've got tons of markdown. You need markdown. You need things that you can kind of sell in sample sales or just in sale, and kind of whether it be mid-season or kind of your end of season sales. But it's so fraught at this moment in time. I think that feels like everyone's operating on kind of really kind of small margins. Everyone's their own kind of little everyone wants to make their own kind of book from what's kind of going on. But it's difficult, and I think for me it is. Fashion is a creative industry, and so therefore you want to make sure that the product that you're selling has creativity imbued within it, that your representation from a brand point of view has creative imbued in it. And I think that, yes, you always going to have to make them hard decisions of what you pull back on, what you invest in, what you don't invest in. You need to make sure that kind of creativity kind of flows through in kind of what you're kind of selling. When the profitability kind of conversations kind of kick in, that's when you're kind of probably getting yourself into a bit of trouble, unless you're, a bit of a insurgent brand who is, you're on a pathway. Your brand is a project, and you're like, we are willing to sacrifice elements of profitability because we believe over 3 to 5 years in our kind of business plan, this is what we need to do. And it's a shame, that's what we were in the process of doing at kind of Matches, and kind of, it didn't all come to fruition because we weren't given enough kind of time. But you can't fix these things overnight. And at times you are kind of dealing with, a mire of issues that have been in the business for 4 or 5 years. Or you create the issues yourself, and then you've got to, you've got yourself out of that kind of situation. But it's a hard balance, I think, creativity and profitability. It is. Whether you're a small business, again, trying to just be, fresh out of college, setting your own label up. How do you deal with kind of, students back in kind of college are not being taught to deal with the operations and the business elements of what's kind of going on. And they need partners to help and support in that. Or you're a massively well-established kind of business, and it could be, you're the Kering Group or you're Prada, and actually still profitability is super important, because it feels that these days the business of fashion is the thing that's actually kind of pulling through in all of the numbers. It's all the numbers and it's all that kind of chat that makes a brand successful, not, wow, that product is amazing this season, the best collection I've ever seen. It almost kind of boils down to what sells instead.
I think a lot of those conversations that came off the situation with matches that I definitely picked up on was how upset people were with how people had been treated in that situation, whether it was staff being made redundant the day after the announcement or brands who had sold stock and stuff and been paid, but it's being sold on matches still. And I think that's kind of indicative of what I'm trying to get at here is this gap between people making decisions about money and all of those things who are kind of controlling things and actually that lack of care and space for creativity that you're talking about there, John, of people in the industry. I mean, Tamara, what are your kind of initial thoughts
So on
about what
Friday, thanks. On Friday, we did a live with Kate from Make It British, and she brought in two manufacturers, Mustafa Fouad, who's made for a number of brands over a long period of time, and Maze London. And you can find it on our Instagram. And it was really interesting to hear what the manufacturers have been through. And this is, you know, Mustafa has worked with Christopher Kane, he's worked with Roxanda, he's worked with a number of brands, and his point was the white knight often comes for the brand, it doesn't come for the manufacturer. And then obviously you have Vampire's Wife who've just shuttered, in part because of what's happened with matches. So what you've seen is buyouts of brands, like Roxanda sold the name, or you have shuttering, such as Vampire's Wife. I went to the sample sale, it was packed. I went 2 days just to check how much do people want these clothes. They really want them. And then you've got manufacturers who, according to Mustafa and Diana from Maze London, they're still being asked to send the clothes in, you know, even when they know that these brands are going under. And then I'm getting email, this morning's email from Matches was 70% off, but it's not going back to the manufacturer. It's going to service the debt collector, essentially, the company that are auditing and doing the numbers. And, you know, it's not going, there were, you know, these brands were inflated, and a combination of Brexit and COVID has definitely shifted the way we dress and our consumer spending habits. And that's where the conversation around creativity and profitability has met so many risks, because how could we have known COVID was going to happen and that we'd start wearing joggers 5 days a week at home and maybe be dressed for Zoom and then, you know, wearing pajamas underneath? Of course it was going to shift things. But we've come out of that. And then what do you do to support? And really, London is the global incubator. That's our reputation. And if we're not supporting that incubation, and the thing about Matches was because the previous owners were a British family that had built it up from its Wimbledon, like days of being this suburban kind of zhuzhy enclave in southwest London into something that became online, was a lot of brands were UK brands with UK manufacturers. So the impact on the London and the wider UK fashion industry can't be underestimated, because it's an indictment at a time when Shein is about to be listed on the London stock market. And that will be the second ever largest listing in the history of the stock market. And that's the oxymoron that I think we're facing. So on the one hand, we're about to list a fast fashion brand that doesn't make here. And on the other hand, a company with not only its own brand, but also many UK brands has gone under and massively impacted. You know, you've got people who've either cashed in their pension as manufacturers to support their workers or are starting again from their garage in their 60s. It's appalling.
There seems to be this kind of lack of, that you make that comparison of the start of Matches when there was more of a relationship to these brands. You think about people like Charles Jeffrey or S.S. Daly, they were picked up out of uni and they were supported with capsule collections. There was more of a close relationship between 100%. Wholesalers and designers. Do we feel like a problem then perhaps in the industry at the moment is that there's less of a kind of duty of care or relationship between kind of business models and actually designers and stylists and people within the industry?
People don't think about people. They think about numbers, they think about product, and they don't think about how it can impact someone's, it's not just their livelihood, it's their personal lives, it's everything. And as a freelancer, I'm constantly having to think of when is the next thing coming in? Like, am I going to get paid on time? And yeah, it has a massive impact on everyone involved. And that product that you're talking about that's going to make someone money, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people behind that product trying to make it sell. And they're putting their heart and soul into it, and they're not getting heart and soul back. And I understand that this is business, but you can do business with heart and with kindness and with thought. I know certainly from the Matches fallout, we have a massive WhatsApp group. It's initially stylists, which is part of the union. And now it's spread out to any fashion worker out there that wants to talk, because doing this is what's going to change things, and it's going to make people understand. It's going to give that human element. But stylists shitting themselves, not knowing what they've got to do, because they've literally spent not just thousands, tens of thousands on credit cards, and not knowing if they're going to get that back. Their entire business model, personal shoppers, was built around the amazing system that Matches had, where you could pull things on a pro and you could turn up to a client's house with a rail of stuff without having to pay for it, and then obviously you pay for what you keep. And people's business model, it's gone. And the ability in London to be able to get clothes the next day or even the same day, like, it doesn't exist. And the problem is their clients don't give a shit. They don't get that.
Yeah.
They have the money. If I've got the money, I can have what I want, and they're not listening.
Yeah.
And it's
No, I think Matches they had such a good service, especially for someone like me, like you. I also work with celebrities. I can get things in the same day, and whatever doesn't fit, it goes back. I loved the service of Matches. I was like, this is a whole new way of life for me. You know, it helps me where I didn't have to have so many assistants to do something. But I don't feel Matches is to be blamed to this completely. I think it's been a double header. We already had Brexit, which made more designers rely only on selling to Matches because they couldn't sell abroad, because they couldn't afford it, and nobody wanted to pay that extra money. So I think we have to start thinking about what the government has done in the long run. It's a double header. You had Brexit, and then we had lockdown. I mean, how is anybody supposed to survive? The fact that Matches even survived that, to be able to say, right, I can buy these new young designers, was already like a feat of amazement. But at the same time, when doing that, there should have been a different rule for young designers and then big companies that are owned by rich people. I'm not gonna say any names because we all know who they are.
Or do it.
Well, yeah, we're not gonna say names, so I'm not here. That's not my reason for saying this. What is that when Matches did start to give the chances to all these young designers, which I ended up buying, using, and it's been great. They should have had a different clause. Someone who can't really afford to lose 30, 40, 50 units, not even 10 units today. Have a different clause for them. If it doesn't sell, you send it back, or you sell it even if it's on sale, and make sure that they're paid, because without their support, Matches doesn't look like it's on fire. You know, Matches was getting my money more than Selfridges. Their buyers are off the chart. They buy the best of the collection. So the fact that Matches is collapsing is already like giving everybody brain damage, because it's kind of, well, wow, how can we do this anymore? We can't get things in a day. You know, we can't supply the demand of, you know, the celebrity dressing and all that, which is how a lot of us make money. And at the same time, the young designers don't get that chance to have that exposure for you to get their product in the same day. So it's all, a domino effect.
I mean, it's a similar thing in the editorial side of things. Young designers do not get seen. I very rarely call in a young designer for an editorial or for a job, because they cannot cover the careers either way that I need to get the job done. Major brands can do that, and You know, when you're doing an editorial, 99% of fashion editorials are completely unpaid, and they do not give you any expenses either. Similarly, in celebrities, when I work with actors, I'm given an all-inclusive rate, which can start at $500 for an outfit, sometimes goes up to $1,000 if you're lucky. Your agent takes money out of that. Your expenses are like 30% of that. How the hell are you supposed to support a young designer? I don't have an assistant. I can't afford to pay for one. I can't afford to go do pickups by myself. I don't have the time. And the way the system is built, it just doesn't allow for creativity and for young designers to succeed. Not let alone young designers, young creatives. There is nothing there to help them.
Could you maybe tell us a bit about some of the work that the Fashion UK branch of Back2 is doing to bring in some of those kind of standardized templates to add some sort of protection?
I mean,
for our
we are at the
industry?
very beginning of this mission that we're trying to do. The fashion machine is ginormous, and there's a small team of volunteers behind it, including then we've got Back2 supporting us. But what we're trying to do, firstly, is build a community, get people to talk, get people to feel safe, and get people to open up about their issues and not use that sort of bullshit where people say, I'm booked, I'm busy, I'm getting paid loads of money, I'm happy, snappy, snappy, snappy. No, tell me you're having a bad day. But what we're also trying to do is just standardize things, create things like a booking or a contracts template for whatever job. We started out as stylists, but we don't want it to just be about stylists, photographers, hair, makeup. It needs to be about PRs. It needs to be about tailors, creative directors, anyone kind of involved that does not have union cover. Models have equity, journalists have National Union of Journalists, but to come together and feel supported and build whatever they need to be built. But yeah, standardize things like templates of contracts, terms and conditions. We've created the thing called the Guide to Good Practice, which is we've done for stylists so far, but we're building it on to everybody else, where we explain this is the job, the processes that we go through to get our job done. This is how long it takes. This is how much it takes. And just physically write things down and make something solid and concrete. Everything, transparency, because everything in fashion is not, there's no transparency.
This has come out of 5 years I lobbied Back2. My husband's in Back2. He's in the film industry. And they were like us 20 years ago. They didn't have a standardization. And I could smell that the writing was on the wall for the previous agent relationship with the death of editorial, which I personally loved when I was styling. I loved nothing more than doing editorial. And I certainly wasn't in it for the money. I just loved it, the storytelling aspect. And I knew that with Instagram, people would be DMing you, which they do, to get access. So it seemed that the previous model, which was if say we were all on the same agency, I wouldn't know what Karen got, I wouldn't know what Michael got, we wouldn't have transparency. And that is how you're able to play people. But the Union for Film has standardized everything. APA and Back2 standardized everything. And I spoke to Karen she was the first person I asked to join Fashion Roundtable back when I started it. And she was like, we need a union. And I said, this has to go through Back2 because they represent the film industry and the ways of work, the hours, and the opportunities for the union to understand that a great stylist will make a great costume designer. Adam Howe, when I started, was at the Face. He did the Serpent as the costume designer, and it won awards because I could see that a stylist had styled it. The way of thinking was really together. And if you take, and the thing is that in the film industry, if you work on a Sunday or you work over hours, you get overtime, you get double pay.
That's also what I think is important is access as well. Like if you think about our industry, the way you get experience is really unpaid internships generally. And I think that's really important to talk about access. I mean, I'd love you to talk a bit about Holiday Club because I think it's really important talking about actually providing spaces where like we've been put in a position where we have to create those spaces to create education systems because the industry is built on being unpaid, and that immediately makes it a very exclusive place to access.
I mean, in regards to that, we're what we're doing at Holiday Club, and where we partner with organisations, we actually do paid internships, and we've seen that a lot more companies and organisations are making that commitment to doing paid internships. But also, likewise, as we've said around various different fashion brands, it's also hard for a lot of agencies right now to be able to offer that paid internship or that paid experience. So it is a balancing act in trying to find organisations that can offer paid internships, but also, I don't know, it's a hard thing to do, because people want experience and people will do things for free, but people need to be paid, and it's a tough time for everybody.
People deserve minimum wage.
Yeah.
That's all they're asking.
But then at the same time, and I agree with you, I don't disagree, but at the same time, I understand from an agency's perspective that we're partnering, that they also don't have the budgets and they're struggling.
Don't take somebody on.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, there's a fine line. There's a fine line. Every single industry on the planet will always have some sort of internship that you don't get paid, but at least cover their costs and their travel and their lunch, at least, because I don't really like to think about a whole generation of stylists that didn't have to pay the dues that I did.
I mean, I'm
just being 100.
A lot of times,
That's what keeps me.
where internships are advertised, I'm
Yeah, I see
seeing
what you mean,
people saying, "I need an intern to do pickups."
Yeah.
Going to a door and picking up bags, that is not learning. That's
No, but
picking
that's
up a bag.
that's not the world that we're in.
No, I know, but
Ooh,
that's
come
what
on,
happens.
like if you want to be in this wonderful world,
but for one
you
day.
got to struggle like everybody else.
But there's
You got to
still
pick up
value in
bags like everybody else. I'm sorry, but
I agree with Karen. I still
Come
think
on,
there's
like,
value in that.
I bought. Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, yeah, because I was going to say, because even within that, it's about learning to be on time. It's about being organised. I mean, I agree with you that there should be a level of pay that people get, because, or some type of expenses covered, but there's still value in some of the things that we might overlook now being in this space in our careers.
But then I guess it's a situation, because people are putting these out there into the world and anyone could be replying. How do you know? It's finding out if the person actually genuinely needs that experience, or if they're just trying to get their foot in the door.
I mean, I personally wouldn't send an intern to pick up or drop off clothes, because there's thousands of pounds of clothes. And I knew of another stylist who was really upset because she'd left the clothes with the wrong person at Portobello Market. I was like, well,
people blame their
babe,
assistant
like,
interns.
you can't blame the intern because she shouldn't have been doing the return.
But you don't employ an intern that doesn't have the desire and the love for fashion, that they don't care what it takes to get in that room. They will go in that room. I don't think anyone now in this new generation should do less than me. And you know what? I have not 1 minute of regret. Not 1 minute. I worked for 6 seasons with Andre Walker. I bought the lunch. I was happy to do it, because I know the industry that we're in is usually made for people who have parents with money to give them a lifestyle. Now we have moved in a whole 3 generations of people that aren't from rich backgrounds, because we have talent. So if you want to be in this little beautiful world, you got to sweep the floor. You got to do whatever you need to do, because that's what makes you stronger. I'm unbeatable. Like, no one's gonna make me cry or break down if the job doesn't go well. If someone can't take clothes, they can't work with me.
But Karen,
I'm just being 100.
You had a wonderful experience with somebody.
I didn't have a wonderful experience.
Did you not?
Of course not. What's wonderful? Life isn't wonderful.
I think a lot of times. A lot of times.
You get what I'm saying? Come on, baby, let's
walking
go.
through the door and, like, when I was an assistant,
You didn't have a wonderful lady either,
used horrifically by the
Oh yeah,
stylists
that's
that I
different.
work
Yeah, I got what you mean. Yeah.
There is no regulation. People can just go into anyone's house, not knowing who the fashion
Fair.
editor or the stylist is. Ding dong, I'm going to go into your house. You don't know what that person could do to
Fair
you.
enough.
And the industry is rife with all forms of abuse, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, and there's nothing stopping that.
I agree with you, actually, and that's the change and the transition we're
dangerous.
trying to make. When we work with organisations, there's parameters around what we do and how that person is going to be treated in the workplace that they do. And I think what we're seeing is we need more support from larger organisations to support the movement that we're trying to do. Because, I agree with you. Like, you don't know who you're going to meet in that house or wherever you go, and you don't. No one deserves to be abused in their
We are talking as a union to educational establishments just to try find ways, if there is a way, to regulate things more. But we're also aware that not everyone can afford to go to university to have that regulation. What about the people who fall through the cracks? Like, how do you...
Get a second job like I did. I had 2 jobs.
I know.
Do you see what I'm saying? Let's go.
It doesn't mean that other people...
Yeah.
But what do we think those systems are that are important? I think obviously education and government is a massive thing, funding. British Fashion Council, those systems, what do we think? What are our priority list of people or systems exactly?
British Designers
come up with?
Not
So
Fashion
what are your
Council.
thoughts on the Fashion Council?
I think it's actually within the industry itself that the fundamental flaw with this kind of situation is that role that you're both discussing, that the hardships of it, but actually you felt like it was kind of part. It was the infancy of your role. It's actually what you did, because actually you wanted to graft in that space to work hard, because actually the person that you were assisting, they did it as well. And there's almost that mentality, attitude towards it there. But the reality is, say, knocking on someone's door, collecting kind of product, doing call-ins, doing send-backs, fundamentally in many circumstances, like, what do you do? If that's not being done, the fashion editorial doesn't happen.
Exactly.
But most businesses almost sacrifice that role because they want someone more senior in a business. And they're like, well, just all you got to do is just make sure, if you're a fashion business and you're going to have a fashion assistant who's going to be a runner and do that work, just create a role for that person. Sacrifice some cash.
Which the film industry does.
Won't even be that high.
Every other industry.
Money.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, Tamara, is like, if you compare it to something like the film industry, I've got friends that work in film, and when they interned, it was much more structured and paid more quickly, and you got into the system
because of the
being
union
paid back for it much quicker.
Yeah.
But I think what you mentioned earlier about funding plays a massive part in that, because likewise, like I was saying earlier, like that's the change we're trying to make. But if you don't have access to funding to grow these incubators or to grow the support you're trying to do, it becomes, it's almost obsolete, you can't do it. And then you have these continuous ripple effects within the industry.
Maybe if they use some of the money for all the parties they've been throwing for the last couple of days and actually put it somewhere where it's needed instead of champagne and canapes, we get somewhere.
I mean, Tamara, I wonder if you could talk a bit about, if you look at the creative industries in the eyes of the UK government and how much fashion is excluded from that, despite all the lobbying work that you've done with Fashion Roundtable.
When I started, I thought, honestly, it's because the government or cross-party, they don't know. I've got a really big mouth on me, and I'm now, 7 years in? And I've run 2 all-party parliamentary groups with hundreds of people coming through the doors of Parliament. We've sent in hundreds of parliamentary questions. We've had committee evidence sessions to the only sector voice into committee, which would be the Environment Audit Committee. I've given evidence to the DCMS Select Committee. I no longer think it's ignorance. It is veering on willful. The budget came out the day of the Creative UK conference. I left the conference to listen, having sat through an awful lot of conversation around the film industry, which doesn't make the same amounts of money as the fashion industry does for the UK economy, to listen to Jeremy Hunt, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, deliver. And now we turn to the creative industry, so it's tax incentives for film, gaming. I thought, great, we're coming. Moved to music, and we're out. Theatre, we're out. So we had nothing. So because I knew there was a general election coming, it was not news to us. We created a sector vision, which I hope that they can get up. If you go to our reports page, you'll get to it. You're on the wrong page, you're on campaigns, you need to go to resources, and then you'll go down to reports. And we've sent that to all of the political parties. We've sent it to the civil servants. And we collated that by holding a survey, as well as compiling data from the events that we'd hosted. In the British Fashion Council's defence, they've recently had 2 million. That sounds like a lot of money. That is not a lot of money. And their remit is London Fashion Week, which is a name and a brand they own. It is not the wider sector. They are not here to represent stylists. They're not here to represent the manufacturers, who fall under a different organisation called UKFT. I've had the unique experience of working in fashion and in politics, which is why I set up Fashion Roundtable to begin with. It didn't come from nowhere. And I feel fundamentally that the point has to come for any changes by lobbying, i.e. having conversations with policymakers. There is a general election coming up, and I urge everybody who's dialing in, if there are issues, whether it's the cost of living crisis and their housing, whether it's access to creative education, whether it's exploitation for workers, whether it's incentives to set up your business in the UK. All of those things are in our sector vision. You will have people coming to your door asking for your vote every day until now and July the 4th. So I recommend you to use it and say, right, what are you going to do for me? We're out of the EU, which is our largest and closest partner still. So many brands are choosing not to sell to their largest and closest partner. Where's your incentive to bring manufacturing back here? Oh, do you think Shein is it? Because I don't think so. I'm speaking for you as a in the third person here, if you get them on the doorstep, because this is going to be a fiercely contested election. Thangam Debonair is the Shadow Secretary of State. She's in a Bristol seat. The Greens are coming for that seat. So don't think that this is the landslide that it's being played at. I'm not reading it as a landslide. I think there's all to play for. Today, Ed Davey came out with the Lib Dems manifesto, and the others will come out this week. I've been told by Labour their manifesto will be thin. So then it's about lobbying them about the first 100 days. What are you going to do for me in the first 100 days? And I think that's where you have to apply pressure. And I think that as a sector, stop feeling disenfranchised. If I've tried to do anything, it's to stop people feeling that it happens with the grown-ups over there, because I've worked with the grown-ups over there, and we understand how to run business, how to adapt, how to pivot far more quickly than they do. And I would suggest that we are also adults in the room, and we have to take a hold of the conversation and lead them towards what we need. I fundamentally believe if we had public procurement made in the UK, it would completely stabilise manufacturing at a time when Macintosh are about to close their factory, the only cotton factory and the only denim factory left in the UK are closing, and when all those small manufacturers, mainly around the London radius, that were working for the brilliant brands that were selling to Matches, are shuttering. It's criminal. So I really think that would stabilise it, and having spoken to the manufacturers, that's what they need.
I mean, why do we think that fashion is so not prioritised by?
Because you've got
government?
Politicians who've worked in politics. They've studied politics.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
They've studied politics, and then they've gone into politics. I am the first I did a mentoring scheme to get women into politics. I was the first to go in from the fashion industry, and I had a total imposter syndrome myself when I went into it. And then getting to speak to them, I'm like, okay, but what are you saying for me? My business makes this amount of money for the economy. Don't ignore me, because by the way, if we leave, the bankers leave. Have you been to Freeze? They haven't been to Freeze. I'm like, well, I suggest you go to Freeze and check out where the real money is, and it's global. And, you know, do what you want, but the global market will pivot. It will go to Dubai. It will go to the UAE. It will just move because it's geographically mobile, because that's the level that we're talking about. The reinstating of tax-free shopping is estimated that it would bring 10 billion back to the UK economy. That would have massively helped Matches. We've gifted it to France in an Olympics year. It's that basic. You can talk about, oh, we'll take 1.6 billion from private schools and VAT. By the way, loads of people are moving out and going to Dubai and Qatar to avoid that. Or you could say, do you know what, 10 billion, and we'll take it back because we've got pride in who we are as a country. That's the bit I'm not getting, because as a campaign, that's what I'd be leading on.
I think it's what I struggle to get my head around is this massive disconnect between, it's like 62 billion that the fashion industry makes for GDP each year, and then there's this disconnect between that and then manufacturing, support for manufacturing, things that we've been speaking about with kind of, safety and support for people in the industry. And I just still cannot get my head around that. And I mean, it's interesting you saying that, you'd like to think it's because these politicians haven't worked in the creative industries and don't understand, but then that maybe it's this willful ignorance. But I don't quite understand why there's a willful ignorance when it's so key to our economy.
I do feel that when we set up there was a lot of data gaps. So there was a lot of information gaps. And, you know, we're doing a report at the moment that I've got an economist from the LSE checking on the data to actually drill home to the political parties that we are the largest of the creative industries. We are. Because I was getting it back from politicians, oh, but how can you be sure? I'm like, what are you talking about? We are. However, we have lost a massive opportunity in the understanding of bricks and mortar retail into online and how you sort out this shift, this cultural shift, that's a global cultural shift, because, you know, women primarily worked in bricks and mortar retail. How do you support those women into the online world? That's a massive opportunity, women, you know, as we're looking at issues around the WASPy women as a policy objective. So all of these issues always have a counter narrative. You know, they're all saying they want to regenerate the high streets. Rachel Reeves is on your social media with Mary Portas today, on your Instagram, talking about how she wants to revive the high street. Well, I would suggest it's with supporting British brands, reducing rates and incentivising them to be a part of our high street. 99% of the UK fashion industry is micro or SMEs. So it is very triggering. I would say it's willful, I'm not sure, I would hope it isn't, when you see aviation and automobiles given massive incentives to stay in Sunderland and in other destinations, and yet Macintosh is going to go and there's nothing done about it. And yet, you know, you think about the jobs, £1 spent in a local economy will bring back 5 to the local economy. So it's vital that this is, and they all say they want it, well then hold them to account.
But also I think the general public sees any creative worker, but the fashion world especially, as you said before, Tamara, as hobbyists. Right from the school level,
but that's,
you go do art and design and everyone goes, oh, it's a lol.
Fashion has always struggled to be taken seriously.
That's because I think we're talking about fashion as though it's London Fashion Week.
That's, I think, what I'm getting at.
What I'm talking about is craft,
is the image of
skills,
fashion
and
and the
local jobs.
reality, you know?
No, so I think the image was created, like I said, by the children of rich parents. So of course, to them, it was a hobby. It hasn't been a hobby for years. And they have to get it together and realize it and stop gaslighting it as if it only belongs to 20 people who work for Vogue. The fashion industry is huge. And there's thousands of kids that are coming here to go to school for fashion. You can no longer gaslight that anymore. You have to take it and hold it and say, hold on a minute. These people are gonna bring money into the UK that are coming here. You want them to stay after school. You want them to open their business up.
Exactly.
They can't open their business if they can't get tax-free, if they can't afford to make clothes to sell, to matches. It's a very 1 + 1. You don't even have to, we don't even want to go to the numbers.
But
The
also,
numbers are crazy.
how does the industry foster homegrown talent who can't afford that education, who can't
Well, like the same money they put into the arts, they need to put it into fashion.
I went to a college show not long ago, and they had the showroom afterwards. Students had hangers with a logo etched in, labels stitched in, not just labels, garment care labels inside the clothes. Like, that's not a fair, money went into that. That's not a fair comparison.
It's not.
And students coming to college in the UK, starting at 18, who don't even know how to use a toilet duck, are being thrown in it and are competing with students who are coming from overseas, who are 5, 10 years older than them, have 2 more degrees, have 10 times as much money. It's just not
So
a fair
at Bath Spa, our demographic is not primarily foreign students. It's mainly British students. And the policy I'm shaping for Bath Spa we're launching the National Centre for Fashion and Sustainability is around regenerative practice. It is around a localised economy.
What do you mean when you say
We're going to be opening a shop in the centre of Bath, which will support local businesses and enterprises in that physical space, because they have 2 million tourists a year into Bath who are like, I see them every time I go down, they're desperate for something to do in this beautiful George and Bridgerton, Jane Austen location without an awful shopping mall in the middle of it. So it's quite exciting to go to. And it also means to run that thread through of looking at from farm to fibre to product. Fashion Roundtable have done a piece of work with the King's Foundation and YNAP on wool. We're taking the King's clip from Dumfries House, and we're taking it on its story in order for it to be produced with their Modern Artisans collection. So by that, that's proof of concept of using indigenous fibres to support localised production and talent. And I think that's the model that we're bringing to Bath Spa, because otherwise I think we are churning out, either there's an issue of why are we bringing international students in when we can't support them in their business, that's insane. But equally, what are we doing for local? You know, that was the Brexit narrative. I've been left behind, I'm really angry, I'm going to protest against this. If we support localised business, if we also, we're looking at how do we support housing for graduates, because there's, as with London, there is a talent drain from a city which is not that cheap to live in, you know, and so all of these issues. There are other organisations, I'm thinking of your work, that, you know, that looked at the BBC of how do we get interns into the BBC from different backgrounds when to live in London is already primarily expensive. So you have to look at all of those issues in the round to support. So regenerative is a kind of buzzword around the fashion industry and around farming. And it really starts with fibre sovereignty, but you could take it down to how do you support local economies?
Mm. One question that we had in from the public was how can the system provide opportunities to those from working class backgrounds? I think we've talked a lot about issues, but is there something more productive we can come to?
I mean, first of all, if you're going to say you want to work in fashion, there's got to at least be 25% of talent there. Not anybody can be, and not everybody can be a doctor. Not everybody can be a president. Not everybody can be a politician. So not everybody can be a fashion student. You know, so I think before we promise them a rose garden, see if they're even capable of handling it or even have enough talent to get involved. And of course, not everybody needs to be a designer, but I think spread out all of the jobs that you can do in order to be in fashion. So if you can't do one very well, there's 20 different other ones. And I think open up the idea of working in fashion. And I think from that, you will get much more people who are able to actually achieve a job.
And just to add on to Karen's point, I think there needs to be awareness more around the roles that actually exist within fashion. I think so many people don't know the varied amount of roles that they can actually get into. So again, you have people going for designer roles or stylist roles because that's what's forward facing, that's all you see, whereas there's so many other aspects to fashion.
But having a education system as well, much like what Bisoye has, where you can try before you buy. You don't have to commit. It's like this. When I was a student, I had to sign away 4 or 5 years of my life when I didn't know my arse from my elbow. And I think being able to try things is so helpful. I mean, I had 1 year foundation degree where you got to try everything within a series of 3 months.
I still think it's amazing though, the Art Foundation in the UK, that you can do that for free straight out of school.
Is it still free?
Yeah, I think it's still free, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm sure, I think so.
I mean, I was lucky because my fees
by the
were
big screen in a
incredibly
minute.
low.
Obviously with that you try things like, you know, it's not just, I mean, graphic design fits into fashion, but it's more of kind of a wider art thing. And maybe that would be great if you could do a more custom arts degree, which, you know, I got to do fashion for a couple of weeks and then I did specialise in it, but I would have loved to do an art foundation that was different parts of fashion.
It all comes down to funding, but having opportunities like apprenticeships where people can work. Look, I learned how to take drugs and drink alcohol at university, not much else. They called it self-led study at St. Martin's. I've got the title, everyone goes, amazing, you were at St. Martin's. I learned fuck all. I learned it afterwards.
It's really
I learned it by doing.
One of the questions that we got was, there's so many art universities with talented students, why does everyone go up to CSM?
It's a name, it's a brand. Like
That's
that
why I'm
new
at
building
Bath
is
Spa.
utter garbage. Like it doesn't even have air conditioning. The fashion making rooms, they don't even have windows that open. So in midsummer when the sun's coming in, the irons are going, the machines are going, people are baking. Like it wasn't built to be a university. It's a name. It doesn't, Look, I'm sure there are incredible tutors at all fashion colleges across the world, but you don't need that name. I learned my craft by doing and being in the world and by fucking up, making mistakes. There is so little room to make mistakes these days, but making those mistakes is how you learn, how you build yourself, and how you learn not to do it again.
I think it comes back.
That was my conversation, really, what I was saying, you know. That's really where it is. Stop pacifying young people and stop giving so much. Let them do the job. Let them try 5 different jobs. And maybe out of that, they will find the one that really works for them. I think they're all under pressure to be this incredible stylist because they think stylists fly around in private jets. That's not reality. It's not reality.
That's maybe the CSM thing as well, is that
Yeah, that's
there's
what I
so
mean.
much pressure to be one thing that people feel like,
I think there's a myth, isn't there, about you'll be Galliano or you'll be McQueen.
yeah, when there's actually
You'll have this kind of, but look at the torture. Look at the reality of that. I do think Charles Jeffrey, I went to his show on Friday and I honestly thought he is as good as Westwood. He is as good as Galliano. And with the right support, he could make as much money, the way I think, for the UK economy as either of those did, although arguably Galliano's made it more for French houses, but I think, or Belgian house currently, but I think that's the interest is. He showed, we were there, it's a wonderful moment. He knew exactly what he was doing in terms of set design, in terms of conversations around identity, but also around tailoring. He was there wasn't much else going on over the weekend, and he isn't Westwood yet, but he's 10 years in, and I think isn't it interesting because this tortured artist narrative is flawed because it plays into a paradigm. It plays into the tortured paradigm, but it's at odds with a cost of living crisis and working class people coming from a working class background. There is no way I would have gone into it if I'd had to pay the amount of money and not had the supports that I had. I had housing benefit. I was able to live in London, not in a squat, which I don't even think squats exist anymore, but loads of my friends squatted. I was able to live with housing benefit and then do a job where the pay was very erratic. If that's taken away, then what systems, which is why at Valspar we are looking at as fundamentally at maker spaces and a maker economy and supporting what would support local talent in localised work away from the London narrative, which sells, I think, it's flawed because London is so expensive, but there are many pockets of poverty in London. And yet, the talent is, how do we get the talent, which comes to what you do? How do we get the talent from communities who are being overlooked to support this tortured artist debutante narrative?
And I just wanted to just touch back on what you were saying about mistakes as well. I think sometimes, even though we agree that mistakes are needed to grow, I think sometimes when you're from an underrepresented group, you're not afforded that opportunity to make that mistake. Because I know from my perspective, I can't afford to make those mistakes because I already face a level of barrier to entry. So I think I don't know what the solution is within all of this. I mean, we're all making our contributions, but I think, there's just so much at stake now that mistakes are you just can't afford to make them.
But doing this and talking about it and being open and admitting there is an issue is a start. It's that foot in the door, the catalyst to getting things to change and saying, I am pissed off and I am so angry at the way the things are going, and knowing that the individual does have the power to make some change, and then as one starts, and then the catalyst, the atoms, or whatever, go off around and have that explosion, and people join together and hold hands and go, no, we have the power to change it.
Sorry, Hetty, I'm going into auto here. So with your work, have you had some feedback that has really fed into that understanding of the mistakes narrative and that,
Could you say that one more time?
Well, it's just, I think what you've touched on there is really interesting. Sorry, I've got into auto interviewer here, where you're basically, I think quite rightly, holding up that the allowance for mistakes is shorter for some communities than others. Has that been some of the feedback as well as your own lived experience.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, we work with a mixed group of young people, but we see it every day that some of them are going for opportunities, and the realism is that they're not getting those opportunities because of the barriers to entry that they face. And then even through my own lived experience, I've faced many barriers to entry. But I think one thing that I think kind of goes back to what Karen says is, and maybe there needs to be some level of change, but it's that pursuit of kind of, I don't know the word to, but kind of like when you were saying about the hardware, like doing the things that maybe conventionally are not, I don't know the right words to use, but kind of pushing for more is the only way that we've been able to see that there has been that opportunity. And it's not fair, but it's what the reality that we face now.
So she's not saying what she wants to say. When you're Black, you don't have the same privilege.
I get it.
You don't.
I get it.
And you don't. Unless you are moving into the space of tokenism, which me and her sitting, no, that's not what we're on. We don't want to get the job because we want to fill a quota. We want to get the job because we're fucking good. And we happen to be Black. Yeah, we want that equal opportunity, but not because of tokenism, because it's real.
Yeah.
To me, I'll just say it like it is. Simple.
And I think also there needs to be a lot more, kind of just even what we were saying about the narrative of fashion in general. I think there needs to be more conversation around the business side as well. And also we're having these conversations, but people who are the investors in the industry and who are the large-scale decision makers, they need to be a part of these conversations, because as much as we want government change, we know that even with that, it's going to be a slow change. And I think we need more people who have a higher level of influence to come in and really understand the work that everybody's trying to do within these spaces to implement those changes. And yeah.
I think that disconnect comes back to kind of, John, what you were saying at the beginning as well, and I think it's something we keep touching on, is a disconnect between, and kind of a fractured industry almost. And again, then what you're saying, Michael, about actually having these conversations and connecting, and how important it is for a designer to have a great relationship with their CEO. Those kind of relationships, we need to work together with all of kind of your different expertise and points of views for it to work. Otherwise, that's when it really starts to crumble.
When you were talking about matches, I was thinking about Mrs. Burstein at Brown's, and she would have a feeling about a brand, and she would go to Sydney, her husband, and she would say, I've got a feeling about, I don't know, Galliano's graduation collection, and Sydney would do the numbers, because there was this great relationship between a visionary who wanted to support talent and a businessman. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of what's needed, is if you're a designer, you definitely need a business head person with you, because you cannot be all things. But equally, in whatever level of the job, there has to be, as John was saying, a combination between the beauty and the magic with the data and the accounting, because otherwise it won't work. When I was speaking to Michael about Bectu, I still don't believe the numbers add up for talent from working class backgrounds to make a living from styling in the current paradigm, because there's just not enough advertising work in the UK. It's so much harder to get EU work now because most of us don't have EU passports, so why would they give it to us? Which is where the better money is for advertising, unless you reach that level where you're going to have visas for everywhere, sorted out by a mega agent. And I just, the numbers don't add up to me. And I worked as a stylist for decades. So I cannot see how you can make a living at the moment. So this is the combination of magic, which London, going to Charles Jeffrey's show felt like a reminder of what London is. Honestly, it was really lovely, but I also thought, this is who we are. This is what we should be doing. This is our market. That's what we should be marketing out. And then obviously with Bath and other places doing different things, you shouldn't be trying to compete with London. It's a different offer. But that's what we should be exporting. And that really is the role, I think, of the Fashion Council, who represent London Fashion Week, is the export of that to the other territories. That's, to me, is their role. That's it. But the understanding from the industry is a lack of a voice to government. Well, then use this. You say it's not going to happen quickly. We are going to be in, I think, in all likelihood, a different government on July the 5th. So it's going to be quicker than you think. So make sure your ducks are in a row. Because what you're saying is, there's the Labour Party is saying all the things that you want them to say, so hold them to it. They're saying they're going to have a STEAM education, that means art back in education. They say they want, work, they're going to sort out housing. I mean, they're going to sort out everything apparently, so hold them to it.
No one said anything that I've seen so far regarding the election about freelancers and how any of that.
They have actually in the Labour Party. They have. I've read it.
You know what they've said?
They've said there's going to be more. I'm going to have to remember now, but there's going to be more greater support and safeguarding for freelancers with contracts and end to zero-hour contracts.
Certainly, in terms of helping freelancers, we've been talking to an organisation called CISA, which is the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority. I have to learn too many acronyms, and it's just, yeah. But hopefully by talking to them, we can find ways that freelancers and people in-house have an independent space to report things like bullying, harassment, things like that, which we just don't have right now. We've had, in our good old WhatsApp group, it's very handy, an assistant messaging us about a massive stylist who's represented by a major agency, offering her £350 for 2 weeks' work. She didn't know that when she picked up the job. He was calling her at 3 o'clock in the morning. He was saying, you don't know how this industry works and you'll never work again, using the good old, all those lines. And we got her off the job. We got her feeling safe, but that was a lot of work, and we need support for things like that.
That's abuse.
Yeah.
That is extreme abuse. And yes, this industry can't survive of the continuation of that kind of abuse. I mean, like you say, at least cover her expenses, tell her up front what it is, but that comes with a book of regulations.
Call her at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Book of regulations.
Yeah.
Every day, everybody has to sign it. It has to be, every other job on the planet has a book of regulations.
That's the beauty of the union, is that then they're on the blacklist.
Which is what we said when I first started doing things with Fashion Roundtable. There's no regulation book for any of us in this room.
But then it's important to have larger bodies, people of influence, voicing their opinion and supporting the work that we're all trying to do, and giving us resources. And that doesn't just mean money, it means people helping.
Yeah, fair enough,
give us the right direction. I'm a stylist. I'm not a business person. I'm not some...
But I think that's, sorry to interrupt, I think that's where you've got it wrong. You are a business person. I'm sorry, but you are a business person. If you're not running it like it's a business, then it plays into, if you're not looking at the hours you're working and the amount that you think you're worth, then it's not a sustainable business. I worked in it for over 20 years, and I had to run it like it was a business, because I started thinking, I'm so lucky, I'm storytelling, I'm so lucky. I was very broke. So, I remember meeting up with you, and had to have 5 covers, and I couldn't pay a gas bill, and I had to flip my thinking about my worth. It's all business. But I think, to your point, when you talk about fashion, it's not just the glamour side. It's the manufacturing, it's logistics, it's the person on the end of the phone taking the digital calls, it's the person packing it, it's all of that. There is a massive skills gap in the UK around manufacturing that hasn't been teed up, but it has to run like a business. Otherwise, you're not going to get the right amount of money for the amount of hours you work. A film person does not go out for work for a day on the same amount that a stylist goes out for. They just don't. And I think that is part of the problem. The money being offered is still not enough for the job.
I mean, one of the first things we did when we were putting presentations together, gathering troops, was to figure out the numbers. The work that we were doing and are doing now, it started out as celebrity stylists working with actors. We are paid an all-in rate, one thing, your expenses, your agency fee, everything comes from that. And we worked out exactly what we were walking home with, and a busy stylist producing 60 looks a year on what was Netflix's standard rate of $500 a look, was walking away with about £13,000 a year.
Joke.
You lose 20% to your agent, If you are with certain agencies that do not have the agency fee paid on top, they take 33.34%. Then about 30% of that goes on your expenses. So per look, you're walking away with about $280. And when we did that, we went, things are bad, but we didn't really realize how bad. And what we've done now is create this guide to good practice, which breaks down what we do, how long it takes, all the costs, and at the end, it breaks down what a rate is, because the intention was to take this document to our employers and go, bam, understand us, understand why what you're paying us is not enough to live. And even if somebody was paying us, I mean, we've just won a recent battle with Netflix where they've turned around and said that we're no longer going to pay people in dollars anymore because that doesn't make sense. We don't pay our UK crew in dollars, we pay them in pounds. And even just having that has pushed the margins up, like we're getting there. So you are right, Tamara, that people are learning about business. I think what I was trying to say from me personally is that, yes, I do my business, I am a business person, but I'm also creative, and there are people like you, John, who can help and can hold our hands and say, well, you've done this really well, but maybe try this. Give feedback, help us. It's not just
It's
about
like business
money.
advice, yeah.
It's
But
mentorship.
Mentorship. But I think with what you're doing, that can be something that's added in as a department that does that.
Yeah.
As well as a department that takes, charge of, complaints about abuse and hours and
That's
things
what the
being
union
covered.
offers.
I think that's only fair, at least. And yes, I do know a lot of people that have taken in interns and don't even want to cover their fare back and forth home and their lunch, which I think is disgusting. That to me is the least you can do. So they don't have to worry about paying for themselves to go and don't have to worry about eating that day.
Don't go buy your Salara handbag if you can't pay your intern properly. It's.
But I,
The polarization of the conversation as well, isn't it? In many circumstances, you're talking about someone picking up an item of clothing that could be £10,000, and they're actually not getting paid to actually collect the item of kind of clothing. It's the disparity in that kind of conversation in that kind of world. And going back to what you said
It's
before,
not only stylists. It's
It's across the board, yeah.
Of course it is. I do think, math and magic, I think that many creatives probably, again, this may even be the political view of the creative world of they're just creatives.
Exactly.
but that,
They
Play
just do
into
fun
it.
stuff.
Someone designed their
Drink champagne,
campaign poster. Like, that is a creative job.
But I completely agree with you, what you were saying about, I think we need to relook at how some of these careers are maybe advertised or presented, because I think the business side to it plays a massive part, even within what we do. Holiday Club is a charity organisation, but I understand that in the landscape that we're in right now, we have to have some type of commercial offering.
Yeah.
And that's how we're able to work with brands, that's how we're able to bring money into what we're doing. So I think, and even with the young people we work with and mentor, we explain that to them, that you have to have some level of business acumen, and that's a part of our course and our offering. And I think it is hard because, if you're naturally someone who's creative, you're not necessarily aligned with business, and there needs to be more conversation around what business is, but it's definitely imperative in this landscape.
Yeah, I don't think it's not that I object to what you're kind of saying. I think it's more a case of what I don't want to hear from kind of people is creatives can't be smart and can't understand business at the same time. Because I think that for me, I think that all of the teaching establishments across the world, whether it be CSM, whether it be someone in Bath, Bristol, Northern, wherever you're going to be, I think the reality is, are them establishments setting their students up for success for when they leave? Number one, you mentioned it before. Do they understand all of the pathways and all of the roles that they can kind of go into? Yes, I've just done a degree in design. But you know what? I've done my degree in design. I've got an appreciation for kind of fashion, for clothing. I actually want to be a buyer, or I actually want to be a merchandiser, or I actually want to work in visual merchandising, or I want to do something in events. Like there's a plethora of things that you can get involved in. But are they showing them kind of pathways? They're probably not. So it's showing them the pathways, and you're not a failure if you don't do this. You were a designer doesn't mean you have to be a designer. But you might find success and you might love what you're going to do over here. But here's the reality of this kind of role. And I think that's what actually people want. Students, young people want the reality of the narrative. They don't want it to be celebrities and champagne. They actually want to understand the fact that, well, this is what you're going to do to earn a living, to own a house, to pay your rent, to pay the bills.
Have kids.
To have kids, yeah, to live a life, and actually also to actually be able to kind of go into a job, because that transition immediately, like wherever you work, you're going to go from, I'm a designer in college and I'm working in my bedroom and I'm manufacturing my collection and I'm doing it myself. I'm not sending it over to someone who's going to make it for me, put care labels in it, because I appreciate the craft. I'm going to come out of it and go into the workplace, and immediately I'm going to hit by business jargon of actually what the rate of sale is, what the cover is, what the EBITDA is, what your markdown percentage are, what the profits are. And success as a designer is going to be built around that. Because actually, it's about business. As I was saying before, it's about the business of fashion. It's about the fact that companies need to make money, and it's that's actually what makes businesses more attractive. I mentioned it before. Does Prada Group kind of sound more attractive because it's 90% up on the quarter or the half versus Kering because they're kind of minus 34 or 38%? Yes, they do. And a bit like, why is that? Is that because as an entity, they're just kind of functioning better and working harder at making their product sell? Or does it go to the top of the fact that from a design and creative perspective, they just got better designs that actually, and I think that's the bit that we haven't discussed is the industry in the place that it's at because we're in a bit of the doldrums of fashion and society and culture at this moment in time. Has social media took us to the doom scroll element of everything that's kind of going on, whereby we are just overstimulated by just too much stuff that looks kind of similar, and I can get it very easily. And you mentioned before about Charles Jeffries and Vivienne Westwood of now. We live in a completely different world. How hard did Vivienne Westwood have to work to battle in a world where social media didn't exist, and it was publications, and it was hoping that someone would go into a news agent and pick up that magazine and see things on the TV, and even if it was Clothes Show on a Sunday afternoon on kind of BBC. The importance of them things, whereas now just saturated. I can't move for the fact that I can kind of see fashion. I can't see it. And on top of that, it's like I saw something the other day on the news, which was switch it to sport, but like apparently Nike they've lost £6.5 million worth of sales for football kits from England specifically, because the kind of football kit, the top is something like £100+ for the kit. And what we haven't mentioned is no one's doing anything about what's eroding the industry with things like DHgate, who are just flooding the market with kind of counterfeits and kind of copies. And they're doing it quicker than anyone else can kind of do it.
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff just chips away at the beauty of creativity and the artisan products that we're meant to be investing in. Yeah. The world is different. The world is going to change. And I think that for me is, what are we going to do? What the educational establishment's going to do? What the creative industries and the business is going to do to actually make sure that the 16, 17, and 18-year-olds of today are ready for the future. What are they doing with AI? Is AI going to steal away from creativity? Is it people didn't think it was going to work before, but now it can make ads, it can make videos, you can tell us to do whatever you want to do and create it for you. What are the establishments doing to actually get our kids of today in a position where they're ready for the future? Or are they still teaching exactly the same curriculum as they did 20 years ago, where potentially on your 2-year course, 3-year course, you got one morning where someone came and talked to you about, if you're going to set up your own business, this is what you should do. And here's how to claim back your cigarettes or whatever else against tax. Yeah? But it's not enough.
I mean, 25, I think something like at least 25% of Bar students have told the university that they want to set up their own business. That's massive. And that tells me that localized economy story, and as well as a complete visceral understanding of accounting and of margins and of your worth, have to be vital, because otherwise you end up in a zero hours exploitative paradigm, which is exactly what we're seeing in fashion, because if it's not Shein, it will be Temu, where the boots can be free. So we have all been raced to the bottom by a system, and yet, unless you stand up for, hang on a minute, we have to work out what we can do here. We can't meet China on the price, so we have to meet on skills. We have to continue with people like Charles Jeffrey to bring a sense of excellence, because otherwise, what are we doing?
I think it's definitely a nurturing of that level of, I think a lot of what we've spoken about is that alignment of creativity and business, but really nurturing that creativity from a very early level of when it comes to education and promoting the arts education as low as kind of school before you're even thinking about university, and promoting it as a kind of skill set, and also promoting that creativity. When I'm I do a bit of teaching, and a lot of the students I speak to, it's like they want to go into fashion, just that for them, they're like, I just want to be a creative director. It's not even about the creation of fashion, it's about,
Yeah.
Oh my
I
God.
want the label of fashion and the idea of fashion.
It's
and
all
think,
I,
But that's what I think, you know, I
no
think,
teamwork.
That's because it's also the social media version of
yeah, that's, and I
the
think
reality of actually what
what
actually
they're
is going to
for.
happen.
what you're saying, and I think maybe that's a crux of a lot of stuff we've spoken today is about fashion finding a way past this idea of fashion and back to what's at the core of it, of why you want to be in fashion and
So stop
supporting that.
lying. Stop lying to the kids. Stop lying to the students. Tell them that they're wonderful and amazing before they even can breathe to think about what they can do. It's all good about what you want to do, but what can you do? First, get a job. You know, the reason why McQueen's label exists today, because he didn't just jump out of college and do his brand. He went and he worked for people. So you understand the business side of it. Do what every other business does. If you want to be a lawyer, you go and work at a law firm as an intern for a year or two. You don't turn around and say, I'm going to be a lawyer tomorrow. It's not reality.
But then, Karen, at the same time, so many of them are struggling to get that foot in, though. So what do you do in that instance? Because in one breath, we're telling them that be innovative, be business-minded, that if you're not getting the opportunities, go create them yourself. But in the other end, when they are applying for internships, apprenticeships, they're not being paid or they're not having access.
I agree with you, but I think we're
Not everybody
all
can.
still
Not
focused
everybody
on
can
the
do
wrong.
it. This
There
is the real world we're living in.
There is a red list of critical crafts in the UK that's set up every year by the Heritage Craft Association. Many of those are crafts that are fashion related, and yet we know that there are people who are crying out for those craftspeople to make that product because that's what the UK has prided in its fashion heritage on. That's why Savile Row and Jermyn Street are destinations of choice for consumers, despite the tax-free shopping nightmare that we're facing and the gifting of that to Paris. So if we, instead of looking at becoming a creative director, I mean, now, as you say, stylist is one of those. When I started, it wasn't. Everyone thought I was going to be a hairdresser. And I was like, no, that's what my parents do. I want to be a stylist. And you know, but now it would be, I don't know, I want to be a craftsperson. I want to make hats, which is a skill that's now going to be taken up by Highgrove, by the King's Foundation as a skill. And last week I went to see what they're doing with embroidery. Those people are reaching a couture level of maker skills, and then they go out into the employment world and they are thriving. So I think it's drawing away from this, oh, become a creative director, be the exhausted genius, because as you say, 1 in 10 million that is. And then look at the other
don't want to be the
opportunities.
exhausted version of it, I don't think. I don't think it's, but I think it's the reality of it. I think that it's the reality versus the kind of artificial kind of perception that kind of exists there in social media. Again, that's that, you know, I've got my kind of my social profile. I'm, you know, this is my name and I'm creative director of this kind of small brand that I've kind of got. But it's the labeling. It goes back to, you know, the labeling of CSM or Royal College. It's labeling myself.
But that labeling for this generation is very important, though. So I think with like, for example, with what you're saying about artisan, if I don't know that career and it's not presented in a somewhat sexy manner, I'm not going to know it. And I think it is for people who are in those spaces to come out more and showcase what they do, because the reality is that generation, that is what is important to them. And they're going to keep saying they want to be the creative directors, the stylists, because that's all they know. But I think it's our responsibility as people working within these, or whoever, you know, to kind of showcase more what they do, because
It's hard, because certainly for me, I very rarely bring on assistants. I get a lot of emails through the door, would love to come work with you, would love to learn from you. But on the rare instance where I can afford an assistant, I need somebody who knows what I want them to do. I'll give them the list and off you go. I don't have the time to sit with somebody and train them. I would love to have that, but I just don't have the money.
And also training someone new on a monthly basis, probably, or something like that as well.
Yeah.
It's getting people in and out the door. That's you know.
Didn't we say before when we were having a meeting with Burberry how it would be great if they opened their doors up to more interns?
We did.
So, you know, the bigger companies that can afford it, they can go in and intern in all different types of fields.
And that's the
That would be helpful.
That's the conversation we're having now a lot with a lot of fashion brands, like opening up their doors for internships, paid early entry roles.
I mean, we met with them several years ago. We did the representation and inclusion report that Karen's speaking about at Fashion Roundtable. That was 2 years.
2 years ago now, yeah.
2 years of research. We had academics and experts. We had a number of evidence sessions. Some of the testimonies were awful. I mean, like awful. And we went to Burberry. We had no funding for that report either, which I thought was really interesting. For anything around sustainability, I could get funding. But for representation and inclusion, couldn't get funding. So I had other ways to pay the team on that. And we did go to Burberry, and they made noises about doing some workshops. I went to the BFC, they made noises about doing workshops, and nothing came of it.
But you know, like what you're saying, we have those I'm having those conversations at the moment, and the biggest conversation that seems to come out of that is they all want to see what's the commercial side to this.
Well, they already know that, because the commercial side of it, as anybody knows who's done any top-level Google research, that you have diversity in the boardroom and you up your sales. Yeah. We all know this. Yeah. So again, it goes to this, is it ignorance or is it willful?
That's true.
What's it, Karen, you always say to me? You always say to me that you know that as a woman of colour, that you have to always pull it together, and you know that when you're speaking on behalf of your community.
It's about futures. It's about futures. People, I don't want to say people of color because I'm not a black girl. So a black woman spends 3 times the amount of money on clothes because she's judged. She just is. I've accepted it, it's fine. And because I spend that much money on clothes, a company like Burberry should invest in me. Yep. So it's investing on futures. Yep. All big companies do it. So a company like, I'm not stomping down Burberry, I'm just using it as an example. Burberry should, like Matches, like all big companies, right? You invest in your futures. And your futures are the people that you bring there, because these are the people that keep you alive. Because we are the ones that spend more money on clothes because we have to. We must. No, I'm not saying anyone in this room, I'm not saying anyone that I'm speaking to here that's involved. But on the massive side of it, in the square, as we would say it, we're judged. So we spend more money, we keep you alive. So you know what? Invest in us. We can give you the numbers. Want me to give you the numbers? I'll give you the numbers because they're there.
I think that return on investment is probably a good place to wrap up, because I think we could probably all have this conversation for many more hours. I think it was quite a long time. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for watching. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.